Pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Justin Rao. Justin is a researcher at Microsoft Research in New York, and I had the great pleasure of being his colleague last year while I was away on sabbatical. I always enjoyed talking to Justin about research because he had a lot of interesting ideas and very strong opinions. And when he told me about this project in its early days, I thought it sounded like a very CITP project. And so I'm very happy that he can be here to share this work with us. Justin has a Ph.D. in economics from the UC San Diego. And after that, he worked briefly at Yahoo and now is at Microsoft Research. He's done work in a lot of different areas of economics. Some of my favorite work that he's done is in the area of measuring advertising effectiveness. He has one paper called with the title something like Here, There, and Everywhere, which is about how hard it is to measure advertising effectiveness using observational studies. And then he has a subsequent paper with the title something like The Super Bowl Impossibility Theorem.
They're making us change it.
They're making these changes? That's such a great title. Well, the paper should have the title The Super Bowl Impossibility Theorem, which is all about how hard it is to measure advertising effectiveness using experiments. So basically, it's really hard either way. And one last thing, I'd like to always add something in my introduction, something that's not on the person's CV. And for Justin, it's that he is actually an amateur boxer. And so here's a picture of Justin before his boxing match. And here is a picture of Justin after his boxing match. But you should have seen the other guy.
You look totally fine, actually. You look like the before picture.
But I'm sure Justin will not look or feel like this after his talk here. So let's all welcome Justin.
Thanks, guys. All right, well, that was, I didn't realize those were printable and high quality off the internet, Matt. Thanks. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about do not track privacy policy and the economics of how we think it would impact the World Wide Web. And this work is co-authored with Ceren Budak, who's a postdoc at Microsoft Research on the job market this year, Sharad Goel, just moved to Stanford, myself, and Giorgos Zervas, who's in the marketing department at BU. And especially since this is being recorded, and especially since this is a topic that has a sort of political elements, the opinions expressed here today reflect those of the authors. They might even just reflect those of mine. I haven't vetted everything I will say with them. And certainly aren't necessarily those of the Microsoft Corporation. Okay. And I don't know exactly how Microsoft feels about do not track, is the honest truth. I have talked to him about it, but I don't know exactly how. Okay, so the World Wide Web, from an economic point of view, I think the most amazing thing about it has this really tight link between content and service provision and consumer purchasing. This feature is what makes a piece of tech like Google or Bing, which is a $20, $30, $50 billion piece of technology, free to use. It's because it is the provision of that service is very tightly linked to you can go then buy. In fact, sponsored search is precisely this and might be the most powerful form of advertising the world has ever seen. And sort of this link is tied together, like I said, with advertising, web search, and fundamentally zero travel costs. When you're on the web, you can almost always enter into a consumer state of mind or consumer actions instantly. You're kind of always in the mall. And this has led to a lot of great stuff on the web. And it's led to a lot of the way you see advertisers and you see things like third-party tracking evolve. This paper is about how advertising works online to some extent. And when you see advertising, it's often an output of some prior tracking of your behavior. Who could have tracked you? We'll use a few definitions. These are definitions that are commonly used. A first party is, the simplest definition is the hosting domain of the website you're on. If you're on Amazon Shopping, the first party is Amazon.com, right? They're the firm you're interacting with. And first party tracking is sort of used widely. It was the first form of tracking used out there. Within session metrics, build user profiles on their own users, build up information on people on their web servers, basically. Okay, so this do not track has nothing to do with this. Some European policies on tracking have something to do with this, but domestic policies have almost never questioned the ability of a If you're on Amazon, they can record all the products you see and then later recommend products to you. There's no legislative efforts to combat that. Third party, simplest, another firm is tracking you to build a profile for ad targeting, the link information. They're doing something to generate a deeper information profile on you, what you recently did, what you're interested in, by and large used to then create a higher value advertisement to target you with, okay? So a third party is just anybody else besides that hosting domain, okay? So it can get a little confusing as to, based on who owns what, but we can think of it as the underlying firm that owns the hosting domain. So if you're on Blogspot, Google would be a first party because they are the overarching sort of corporate entity that runs that server, okay? Tracking's pretty prolific. There's a Firefox plugin called Lightbeam. It will show you who's tracking you when you go to certain sites. New York Times is, maybe a lot of people here with the New York Times. You'd be happy to know that when I accessed the New York Times last February, 27 sites connected. One of these is a web server New York Times is using to serve me stuff, and 26 of which are third parties. Some of these names, if you're in the industry, Scorecard Research, that's ComScore, AdFootprints.com, that's a data brokerage, things like that. Other ones I don't even know, and I work in this field, so it's a little bit of a mystery. So New York Times, they're doing a good job of spreading that information out there. Huffington Post is a little more prolific, 38 sites when I visited, one visit. Wikipedia, just Wikipedia. So it's not something endemic to web hosting. Certainly if Wikipedia wants to, Wikipedia is very careful when they host images, they host them on their own servers. So if you visit, say, my website, you might have an SSRN connect, so it might say 2. But by and large, these additional connections are through sites that, if you sorted them out, you'd realize what they're doing is trying to track users to build sort of informational profiles. Rather than try to explain technically how this all works, I'll just give you a few examples, and we'll talk about how these examples would be limited by certain privacy policy and privacy legislation that's been proposed, rather than talk about cookie syncing and all this sort of fancy stuff. So I think a very, well, now I mentioned like boxing. The most obvious example when this happens, because you can tell it must have happened, is retargeting. So I'm on Amazon looking at a nice pair of boxing gloves. I go to ESPN, DoubleClick, which is an ad exchange run by Google, runs ESPN's ads. I see an ad for boxing gloves from Amazon. Okay, so it's from someone I just visited. Is there a third-party step going on here? Yes, there is. The only way Google knows I'm the same person that was on Amazon is they've synchronized Amazon's user ID with their user ID for me. That's called cookie synchronization. So think of it as every website has a bunch of user IDs, and I need a dictionary to map user IDs. If I see the boxing gloves and 2 minutes later see that ad from Amazon on ESPN.com, they somehow figured out I was the quote-unquote same person. The third-party step there is what we call cookie synchronization. And this is why you'll see a double-click cookie on almost every, on definitely every site that uses double-click to serve ads, double-click beacon, but most sites generally. Okay, so there is a third-party step there, but notice the ads are from Amazon. So from a privacy legislation, we might think this is one class of things. Amazon certainly knew that, and it's not from not someone else trying to sell me boxing gloves. So this is retargeting. Behavioral targeting is I'm on WebMD. I search for cold remedies, but you can imagine it being far more sensitive than this. I go to ESPN, which I often do, double-click serving ads. I see an ad for some cold remedy. It's from a company I've never visited before, right? Here the third-party step is that an information profile that grabbed the query string from WebMD was passed or sold to a company that's interested in advertising for people looking for cold remedies. So this is behavioral targeting with a third-party step. Demographic targeting. Say I visit the New York Times, I go to ESPN, I'm on DoubleClick. I see an ad for, it's designed for a high-income user, it's for a Lexus. Okay, I've never visited Toyota. The third-party step here is that this information profile was passed or sold, and they're building a profile on some demographic quality. Not based on sort of recent behavior like the boxing glove example, but based on something about New York Times visitors that might convey something of demographic interest. Contextual targeting. I'm on WebMD. I search cold remedies. I'm still on WebMD, and while I'm on WebMD, I see an ad for some cold medicine. What's the third-party step? There is none. The advertisement system WebMD could be using could just say on your own site, I want to run an ad next to queries for cold remedies. So I'm using the context of the site visitation to run the ad. And an example that's very prolific is what we call in-house targeting. I'm on Facebook logged in, liking stuff, things like that. Facebook serves their own ads through what they call Facebook Exchange. The vast majority of ads on here today and historically up till this year were all used in-house targeting. And I see an ad for, based on my user interest, based on what Facebook knows about me. Again, it's from some company I've never visited before. There's no third-party step here because this information is all possessed in-house by Facebook. Okay, so that's in-house targeting. How would privacy legislation affect these use cases, which really capture most of the use cases out there? So examples 4 and 5, which were contextual targeting and in-house targeting, they're going to be permissible under all do not track. Because remember, do not track's not going to, unlike some European policies, not going to affect what I can do sort of in-house. Example 1, which was this retargeting, it's going to be permissible under some versions. It's going to depend on how the technical aspects of the law treat cookie synchronization, depending on how much information is acquired. So maybe I don't get any other information from Amazon except for the same user ID. I don't know anything you're doing on Amazon except that, XYZ equals ABC. And examples 2 and 3, where information profiles were transferred, almost every do not track policy would bar those if the policy had bite, and that would how widespread they would primarily depend on whether it's an opt-in policy or an opt-out policy. So national do not call list, I get on the list, I opt out of calls. It could have been like a national you can call me list, and I'm pretty sure probably no one's signing up for that list. Or the only reason they sign up for it is because like AT&T would sign you up when you got a phone in your house, which is in practice how these things happen. Okay. Tracking has been around. The way the web works is fundamentally allows tracking because the web in general was built in a system where it was built in a, yep? Oh.
Question about that. Are there any contractual prohibitions on uses of information? For example, if I have a small hardware store, can I write into my double-click contract that they won't send the information to Home Depot?
No, it's interesting. So like there's certainly that contract could be written, but is in general not. And I'm not aware of those things being written. So one thing you might ask is like, why would the New York Times put all these trackers on their site? They control a very valuable segment of users that they might want to try to monopolize. Like American Idol, that certainly doesn't sort of say, oh, by the way, 80% of American Idol viewers watch The Voice, so we're not exclusive anymore. They don't provide that metrics. As to why, they might be making a strategic mistake. But so the hardware stores don't do that. But a broader form of your question is, are there limits on the contracts we could write? So that from the legal side of things, which I won't talk about, the degree to which information becomes personally identifiable, there become restrictions on how it can be bought and sold. In general, if you follow the letter of the law, you might say, well, it's not personally identifiable. But if I give you a piece of information that you can easily link to a home address based on one database merge, does that count as personally identifiable? That's a legally murky question that the Constitution certainly doesn't speak to very well. And so if you follow the recent court decisions, we're sort of sorting out how that should be interpreted. But so there are restrictions in the marketplace and the contracts can be written, but those kind of ones you're talking about don't seem to happen, which might indicate that there's underthinking going on, or there's lack of market power of that small hardware store. So, like I said, the internet was built back when everybody trusted each other, like web spam. I have a paper on web spam, which sort of makes this point. And basically, I can serve an image on my website from any web server that will accept that request. So the internet was sort of built in a very sharey sort of way. And all tracking is doing is basically HTTP requests that make the web work. So tracking, the ability to track has been around basically since the ability to surf the internet has been around. Why is this now only an issue now? Well, the value of tracking is fundamentally unlocked by real-time user-based bidding for display ad inventory. So if I could track you, but I couldn't identify you, I couldn't find you when I need you, I couldn't bid on a specific user, I can only bid on New York Times site, I can't say Matt on the New York Times, then tracking doesn't have near as much value. So in the last 4 years, the fraction of inventory has been sold on display inventory that's sold on real-time bidding has gone from sort of small to the vast majority. So that's why it's an issue now and wasn't an issue 10 years ago when the technological capabilities were there. 10 years ago, it was all done in-house by like a company like Yahoo invented behavioral targeting. And then you come to Yahoo and say, give me users that recently went to Yahoo Autos. But now you can say, no, give me someone that recently looked at, in this case, a handbag that I was looking at. So these are just web shots of my browsing. So how does this sort of been put together? Well, there's definitely evidence that advertising is more effective when it's targeted. And real-time bidding has proliferated. it's totally illegal for third parties to track you, modulo them worried about them getting information on their servers that are personally identifiable. This doesn't seem to have really stopped anyone from doing anything. So 91% of the top 500, 2012 independent research, 91% of the top 500 sites have third-party tracking. In that top 500, there's 524 unique tracking entities. Do these refer to 524 firms? Less clear because some of these guys make 20 different sort of products. But it is incredibly widespread. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is not clear, but that it's widespread is undeniable. So how does do not track legislation work? Well, it all surrounds what's called the do not track header, which is already a part of HTTP protocol. What this does is it could disable certain pixel beacons, or basically pixel beacons are just requests, HTTP requests, from firing off. Compliance is currently optional. So you are probably familiar with this header based on the fact that any web browser you use, you can go say, tools, privacy settings, tell websites not to track me. What is that doing? That's setting a flag in your browser from 0 to 1 that could say don't load certain requests. So when you get emails, sometimes the images won't load because it's not from a trusted sender. And that's because a flag has been set in your email program, and then you say, no, I'm going to override that and load these images. But those HTTP requests weren't fired off because of some security setting by your email provider. This is similar as what it would do, okay? But the tracking things you wouldn't notice. Do not track legislation centers around some implementation of this header, okay? Right now, compliance is optional. So I have some sort of bad news for you in terms of that little browser trick I just told you about. I did a little experiment with optional compliance. Other people have done this in much more sophisticated ways, but I did it in a way I could do it in 5 minutes. I visited 13 popular content sites, all 13 sites you probably would have heard of or your kids would have heard of. On one experiment bucket A, I told Firefox, tell sites do not use third-party tracking, so don't do it. In bucket B, actually, there's one option you can say, no, it's definitely okay to do. There's default saying, I don't have an opinion, but this is saying, no, I actually really like it. I want to contribute to the advertising market. And if I do this, the same 13 sites, over here, 135 third parties connected when I said don't. Over here, 145. So there's a small difference, and if you look it up, there are some like nice guy trackers that are their public stances. They really respect this header, but it's the minority. So that button doesn't do anything. To give you an idea of like how sometimes the media misses the point on some of these things, 2 years ago, Microsoft released a new Internet Explorer, and it defaulted this flag to this side of the thing, do not track. And advertising groups, and there was this big dust up, and you might have read reports on it. I didn't read a lot of reports saying, by the way, this doesn't do anything right now. And it doesn't do anything right now. I wasn't part of that decision that was made, but I'm assuming that was known when the decision was made. So in some sense, it was like, maybe if do not track got enacted, then the fact that 1/3 of web browsers had do not track, would matter. So maybe they're just forward-looking, but as of now, it's not going to do much, if anything. So the legislation I mentioned, I'll just go through it quickly. There's been, and I should mention, do not track is a blanket term to anything surrounding this header. And you can imagine the way you technically write it, when will this matter? Well, maybe it doesn't apply to cookie synchronization, but it does apply to behavioral profiling. Maybe it doesn't apply to demographics. So there's a huge blanket of policies, and a lot of them are very technologically sophisticated, and a lot of them aren't. There's the Consumer Privacy Bill of Rights. This has been proposed by Republicans, Democrats, executive branch, never made it out of committee. Do Not Track Me Online Act did not make it out of committee. Various state bills have never made it out of committee. Various state bills that involve this header have never made it out of committee. There was one in California that websites had to say, notify consumers they don't respect the header. They say, by the way, we don't respect this header. I don't think it made it, but it did make it out of committee, but it didn't make it. Okay. So that's the legislative effort, is that there's been a lot of interest and there's been a lot of activity, but it's never really made it even to an open vote. And some of these policies were deeply flawed in terms of their technical aspects, and so they were criticized, sort of rightly so, from the tech community. And some just didn't have the political muster to sort of get it out of committee. So in summary of the legislative and the policy landscape is that, in our opinion, I haven't mentioned anywhere in here how important privacy or do not track what are the numbers surrounding it? How important is this component of advertising to the web? And another side of that equation was how important is privacy to consumers? And these numbers are in general missing from this debate. But one thing is clear. There are clear costs to ad revenues. So it's at least some numbers have been generated that it's obvious it will damage advertising revenue from these simple, at least in the short run, it will limit the ability of advertisers to build these informational profiles. And without a replacement technology, undeniably in the short run, ad revenue would go down. But by how much? That is definitely an open question. And how, relatedly, how much would impact of this segment of the advertising market affect e-commerce more broadly, web publishing more broadly? In this paper, this is what we're going to address with some empirical evidence. But importantly, components we do not address, privacy, largely an existence good, and there's not very good evidence on how much people actually value privacy, but we'll talk in the end about what those valuations would sort of need to be. Another whole strand of research is surrounding the role of sort of data security broadly in limiting things like identity fraud, which is mainly people getting into your money and taking it. Data breaches have been implicated in a substantial fraction of identity fraud, which is not incredibly surprising. There's no direct evidence that I'm aware of that tracking plays a role, but there's certainly circumstantial evidence that it probably does. We're not going to get into that today, but that's a part of the other side of the equation. And then we alluded to this, the legal questions surrounding personally identifiable information. These are important considerations, but not going to be part of the kind of the one-dimensional economic approach we're going to take today, but certainly are being discussed in the broader array of these issues. Okay, so what are the data we're going to use to look at this sort of broad-scale empirical look at how important these forms of advertising that utilize third-party tracking are to e-commerce and web publishing? We're going to use an internal Microsoft resource. If you've seen studies of web browsing, they invariably use a piece of software installed on a browser. In this case, it's a toolbar. They're based on an opt-in agreement to form a panel for web browsing. They're US-located user, and almost everything I say today will be very US-centric. We've limited to US companies and so on and so forth. To give you a sort of scale of the data, we'll be talking about 320 million shopping sessions, and we'll be limiting to the top 10,000 sellers. So we're looking at sort of a broad sample of people doing shopping-related stuff on the segment of sellers that corresponds about 98% of the market. And we'll be having a year of data corresponding to very close to present. So
about the users. So are some of these users possibly using other self-help mechanisms against tracking?
Yeah, so insofar as we will be unable to look at any sample of users like this, what do you miss? You miss their other channels, so their smartphone. And you're going to miss the users that, for instance, take users that always use in private mode on browsing. We're not going to have users like that. So insofar as they fundamentally differ in terms of their e-commerce and their browsing activity, we'll miss them. In no way do we think these users are almost certainly not representative, but the broad angle lens that we're looking at the market I don't think will be necessary.
So, but people who use things like ghostery or ad block, they would also necessarily be outside your panel.
Yes, exactly. And although we'll be using, interestingly, ad block is a very useful resource to study ads because they give you a great list of what are ads. So we'll be actually using ad block's list, but we will be outside. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely. So to kind of definitionally, interest definitions, there's two sides of the market we're interested. There are content providers. These are websites hosting content providing services, Facebook, YouTube, Matt's website. And there are advertisers, and these are firms, advertisers online are by and large firms selling things online. They're your e-commerce firms. Amazon and eBay are definitely the biggest ones out there, but there are, in the top 10K, there are lots of sort of small specialty stores that sell rugs, lamps, and so forth. So, or a credit card online or whatever it is. And these are the two sides of the market that we think will be negatively affected. What will the effect of privacy be? These guys get less detailed information on their consumers. Their ads get less effective. These guys, if they use ads to support their business, will get degraded revenues. Okay. That there's a complicated path to how that would happen, but that would be what you're concerned about. Do not track. No one. Only do not track sort of might be good for anyone in the long run because different technologies emerge. But in the short run, we certainly would agree that all the evidence would indicate that there'd be a damage to this market, and there'd be a benefit to the consumers based on the privacy they're bestowed online and general security of the information.
It seems like you're assuming here that users won't change their behavior with respect to other self-help means, depending on whether do not track is available.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm almost implicit. Most users avail themselves of no self-help means. So to affect the modal or median or even the 90th percentile user, you have to almost do it for them. So that's what's going on. Even right now, though, your self-help means are quite limited based on if you have an in-private session going, you will in general be tracked, but you'll just clear the slate every time you initiate a browser. But in general, of our view of do not track, the precise policy will dictate the workarounds, and we're only looking at kind of what is the basin that will be affected, and how that will be affected will be, for instance, opt-in versus out will fundamentally affect where it lands, and we're kind of remaining silent on that. Yeah.
I'd like to discuss this maybe later offline because I think a lot more users. I think the number of users who have some kind of self-help is actually maybe higher than you're estimating, but we can talk about that offline.
Yeah. So let me. We certainly should, but let me at least maybe reframe what I just said for a longer run point of view. If it was the case that in the long run, awareness of tracking gets to a level that majority of users start installing AdBlock Plus, well then it's not obvious that privacy legislation is bad for both sides of this market, because the counterfactual is that they'll have to have this huge battle with these ad blockers, which would be costly and a bit of a mess. So it's certainly not obvious in the long run that it's bad for these guys, and with paper we'll talk about that. In the short run, if we just sort of switch this channel off, we're kind of thinking instantly what would happen. And there, at least the existing evidence is that there would be a negative. But in the long run, it's certainly possible that the counterfactual is very hard to predict, and it could be that the advertisers themselves should be much more pro-privacy than they are. That certainly could be the case. So we're going to talk about, we're going to try to assess the importance of various channels driving e-commerce by what we call how you got there attributions, but we'll talk about some a little more permissive attribution schemes. But the basic thing we're going to do right now is going to analyze the data by looking at the proximate path to how you got to start shopping. The panel nature of the data allows you to do this. How you link these things up can be with tabs and stuff can be a little bit complex, but a lot of effort went to doing this. But we can reconstruct the panel. So we're interested in these browsing transitions, and then how are we going to know what clicks? If you're on the New York Times and you arrived at Amazon, how are we going to know what intermediated that discovery? We're going to use click tagging, and we're going to use a list of ad servers, analytic providers, and so forth provided by AdBlock Plus. So we're going to use their infrastructure. Every week they publish a list of these are ad servers, these are trackers, and these are entities known to be advertising. Almost every ad you click redirects. Every ad you click certainly does this. Almost every ad that's served does this. Redirects through something that, and this is how AdBlock Plus, how the product works, and it's an open source company, and so they publish this list every week. So we're going to identify ads this way. Okay. So what are the kind of paths we're looking at? The simplest path is direct navigation. I'm on the New York Times. I just type in Amazon.com. I want to go shopping. Okay? And that actually turns out to be the most prominent path. Organic search is you're on a search engine. Organic search is going to be you search for a type of good. So you search for a big screen TV. If you search for Amazon.com, we're going to call that direct navigation. That's more of a shortcut to getting to Amazon. But if you search for a big screen TV, you're searching for a product category. Paid search is you make that same search, but you click on one of those links that's paid for by the advertisers, not organically delivered by the search engine. Display ads are banner ads and picture ads that are usually paired with content when you're reading textual content. Social ads are going to be ads that show up in the news feed of a social network. It's like 99% of this is Facebook, so just think of it as Facebook. And it's when it says like Matt recently liked, this restaurant, and it shows up in my news feed. And it's that almost always is sponsored, and it's on a pay-per-click basis. So if I click on it, then Facebook gets a kickback from the advertiser, gets the payment from the advertiser. Okay? Content providers and advertisers can provide links just to each other, so there's basically just links. Email marketing would be from content served in your web browser, but it'd be delivered by the advertiser. And then there are these coupon or deal finding sites that account for about 1%, but I will mention them, that you go there to find daily deals and so forth. So some attribution notes. What we're looking at is these single transitions, but in a robustness check, we will attribute all direct navigation within a month of an ad click to the ads. We just look back a month, and if you clicked on an ad, we're going to give the ad all the credit. So like that's just how you found it. We're going to throw all the credit your way. And we'll also limit to businesses that only do business online to make sure that we're not missing kind of, the ones where we're more sure we're not missing that off-channel purchases. What I'll say is that this doesn't fundamentally affect any of the results. So in this paper, we're going to break down advertisers into market segments. And I'll have to skip some of the details, but basically we use search histories and we take queries and we look at where you go after that query. So these are queries surrounding, these are two real people that sell floor coverings. And we can identify they're in a similar market segment by the fact that they share an overlap of the queries that go to them. And we can, you can imagine the technique is actually a little fancier than just the PowerPoint graph, but the basics can be grasped there. I'm going to skip this slide because every time I try to do it, it screws me. But one note is that how, like in this Rugstown, Rugs USA, how similar they are, think of that as generating some kind of similarity weight for that market. Your contribution to a market will be that weight times your size. So Amazon is effectively in like half the markets we study, just weighted by the amount of search traffic they get from that segment of the population, that segment of the user query base. Okay, so like if Amazon gets 1% of their queries about home appliances, there'll be a big player in home appliances, even though they're not that important to them because their size is that big. So it directed the paper there for a little more detail, but that's sort of how we do it. Has the feature that because online, big players are kind of everywhere. And then for content providers, we do the exact same thing to generate sort of a list of, for the content provision side of what you're providing. So you can imagine Match.com and OkCupid both provide dating services, and the queries that lead to them share a lot of semantic similarities that we can leverage. Okay. So now I'll just jump into the results from the advertiser side. What I'll say here is that the previous papers on Do Not Track from an advertising perspective have looked at, say, I'll work with a given advertiser, and I'll have them do a targeted campaign versus an untargeted campaign. I'll have them buy up third-party information, and I'll have them not do that. And I'll look at the effectiveness of that campaign, how much the click-through rates drop, and so on and so forth. So it gives you and those have looked at, they usually say like 40 to 60% drop in the performance of that ad channel. What we're going to do is something totally different. We're going to say, what style of ads are going to be affected by Do Not Track, and how important are those style of ads to the market in general? And then you can take that 40, 50% number and calibrate it. Okay, so it's just a completely different angle. But notice that first paper wouldn't have told you much about how important it was to the market as a whole because you don't know 50% of what. What am I multiplying this by? Okay? And here, the weakness is we don't know exactly the detrimental effect because we don't know the exact policy that's going to be enacted. Okay, so we started the talk by looking at the types of information, the type of trackers. We're going to relate that back to what we call information types. So a first-party information type will be the hosting domain. The hosting domain is using information they built on the user to deliver the ad. So Facebook. Third-party, domain's not associated with the hosting domain. What we call zero-party is that there's actually no substantial information used to target a consumer beyond what is volunteered at that moment. So this is primarily search, but also like direct navigation, obviously there's no information used. So here, these are forms of advertising that require almost no tracking to be effective. So currently, search doesn't use any tracking. It just, you give an IP address where you are. You might have localized ads for the pizza place down the road, but they're not tracking you. If you say pizza Princeton, they know enough about you to deliver the ad they need. Right? Nothing else has to happen. So what do these comprise? First party is social advertising, email direct marketing, and that's based on the laws, domestic laws surrounding email marketing. Video ads on YouTube, and in reality, a site like Yahoo, which does most of their stuff, but they actually serve their ads through an exchange that allows you to use third party, so it would go into the third party category. Third party, almost all of those banner ads you see online, almost every banner ad you see online potentially could incorporate a third-party bit of information based on the architecture of how that ad was delivered to you, and empirically based on how they're delivered to you, by and large, more and more they are. It's hard to find precise numbers on it, but we're going to, out of conservatism, lump all those. If it's capable of doing it, we're going to say it's going to be affected. And zero-party, direct navigation, organic search, paid search, these categories don't involve any tracking to happen. So how do shopping sessions start? So we take those 320 million shopping sessions, and now we're going to tell you basically how important each one is. I've colored the bars by that information type. The lighter the bar gets, the more third-party information is being used. So direct navigation accounts for 35% of shopping visits. Amazon and eBay are higher, but even the small sites get 25%. So the bigger sites do get more direct navigation. They have higher brand awareness, and they have more kind of loyal visitation. But this is true for most advertisers get the most direct navigation. The next big one is organic search. And this number has steadily climbed from, no one's done this sort of study back in the day, but initially there was a sort of, economists kind of said, man, no one searches for goods by saying big screen TV sale online. They just go to one retailer, this really high prices version. So 27% of shopping sessions start by someone entering a product category or a product name into a search engine and then shopping. Okay? So about 30%, almost as much as direct navigation. Organic links from sites that do reviews, blogs, and links that aren't paid attribution account for 14%. Search ads are 9 to 10%, depending on how we cut it. This means that 1 in 10 shopping sessions starts from a form of advertising online. I haven't seen an analog offline, but this number strikes me as surprising, and it's large. Search ads are enormously important. Notice 9 to 27, it's about a fourth of all search-related attributions. Ads are a fourth or almost a third. So search ads are an enormous component of e-commerce. And even of search, they're a huge component. Remember, this is throwing out the Amazon.com style searches, which is a high volume. Those are going to end up on direct. This is searches for big screen TV. Okay, so search ads are 9 to 10%. I know of no offline number how many shopping sessions start at the malls that are directly media by advertising. I know of no comparative number, but that's what number we get online is. Yeah.
Did I understand you correctly earlier that even if you're looking at a direct navigation session, you'll go back in history for a month, and then if you found that they saw a display ad for the product that they end up purchasing, you'll take that away from direct and put that in display ad?
This graph does not represent that.
Okay.
I have done that, and I can tell you how the numbers would change.
And I'm curious, is there a big difference?
So so display ads here are 3%. That number goes to 3.5%. So it's about a 20% change in the number. So as a display advertiser, you would certainly care about it, but it doesn't make that number 6%. So it does change it. How else do the numbers change? Well, direct obviously falls, and stuff that all these numbers basically go up and direct going down. But so direct will look less important if you give all downstream direct navigation back to the original channel. But it doesn't go away. Of direct navigation, some of it is autocomplete, and a lot of it is just, the user visited Amazon, and then 4 months later visits Amazon. So there's no 1 month intermediating other channel. Yeah, so the graph does change, but for display, not fundamentally. Social, it goes up to about 4%. So it does, every ad channel does go up, and as an advertiser, it's something that if you're measuring ROI, it's probably a challenge you face of how much downstream visitation do I credit to the ad versus, and so forth. Yeah. So moving down the things, email ads, 7%. And then we get to social and display. So social, by and large, Facebook. One thing that jumps out, this is saying that all of Facebook is equal to the rest of display advertising online. Thankfully, these numbers correspond to market cap of Facebook relative to the assets held by Google and other firms that weren't display advertising. But this is sort of remarkable. They are now, half of clicks on this sort of advertising are on Facebook. And Facebook, almost all the clicks we see off Facebook are these news feed clicks, not that stuff on the right side. They've almost eliminated that. So they're actually from the news feed, and we know that because they themselves tag those differently based on the referral tag they're throwing on there. And so then we get down to display. So display, and of this 3%, about 2.8% is sold on real-time enabled exchanges. So in principle, of this 3%, the vast majority could incorporate information that would be affected by a do not track policy. And on the right-hand side, we just sort of amass things. So of shopping sessions, the proximate cause, 87% of them are from required no tracking. They're either direct navigation or stuff like search, which requires no information. No information tracked. The browser does surface the IP address to the search engines for local searches, but that's not people aren't talking about that being affected. 10% uses first-party information. This is social, and this is email. Email because once you're a customer of a company, you see that checkbox. Do you want to receive a letter? Do you want us to receive a sale? They check it for you. Most people don't uncheck it, or a lot of people don't uncheck it. Maybe a lot of people want it. And then third party is about 3%. To the question, how do these numbers change? This drops by about 12%. If I start attributing it, most of it goes into the, about 10%. Most of it goes into the first-party channels. Direct drops by 10%. Zero-party doesn't because a lot of it goes into organic and search ads. But it does change. I think we have that. Either we have this picture in the appendix, or we're trying to understand exactly the differences better to write up a separate paper, but we've computed it. The question, though, is this 3% on average might belie a reliance across market segments or across advertisers. Also, another reason to look at on a more fine-grained is that for some advertisers, clicks might not capture why they're advertising. But presumably, if there's heterogeneity in that, then we'll find advertisers that it does, they rely on it a lot more. Or there might be markets where, like for instance, the credit card market, the click might really capture the sign-up rate. But for home furnishings, people don't click and buy right away. So they don't look at clicks as a metric they care about as much. So we'll look across markets for that reason. Left-hand side, what I'm showing you, is across the dark line of the top 10,000 firms. It's saying how many of the top 10,000 get 3% of their traffic from third-party sources, about 50%. How many get 10%? About 8% rely on third-party sources for greater than 10% of their traffic. Nobody in our sample relies on third-party sources more than 25%. And I'll say the same graph for search. There are many advertisers that get the vast majority of their traffic through paid search because they have low organic relevance. So your Bob's Big Screens, Amazon and eBay and all these big guys are showing up in the search. No one knows you. You get almost all. But you, for whatever reason, probably because big screen TV is a very targeted thing, we don't see it in display. Dotted line is the top 100 firms. It's a little, what you see is that the larger firms, by and large, rely on it less. And majority of the top 100 firms, reflecting our group mean, 52%, rely on it less than 3%. But there's very little heterogeneity here. Of these top 10,000, only 800 rely on it more than 10%. So very low high reliance. And on the right-hand side, we'll show you that, yes, in fact, it does grow with as your rank decreases. So ranks 1,000 to 10,000 are retailers that you probably only know if you've bought them from them. Ranks 1 through 10 are ones you all know. And as you move down, it goes from 2% in the head to about 4% in the tail, so to speak. And what I'll say is that this is true of almost every advertising form. Actually, it is true. So Amazon and eBay and these big guys have to pay for less of their traffic because they have higher brand awareness, they have more loyal repeat customers, and importantly, they have really high organic ranking in search. Okay, so they're paying for a lot less across the board and for display. But the important point here is it's not the case that what we really be worried about is that the small guys are very heavily reliant. So it really facilitates competition in a way that the mean misses. For sponsored search, actually the small guys it goes up to the moon. For display, we don't see that. So we're not thinking privacy legislation is going to be a big competitive imbalance shifter, but we do see that in general there already is imbalance in how much they rely on it. But we don't see it. We're going to kind of cut that channel off. Okay, across markets, probably you can't read what's on the y-axis here. I've done my best to make it as big as possible. It just says stuff that you bought in the past. You've probably not bought all this stuff, but you bought some of it. And it's going from eyeglasses, where 7.1% of sessions start from a click on a display ad, or a display ad on a third-party capable exchange, down to home, decorations, and rugs. And like I mentioned that maybe for those segments of the market, they don't look at that immediate click attribution being that important. Important to notice here, larger market segments have less third-party reliance, okay, which corresponds to maybe just the pure size effect. In a regression, none of these things show up significant. But importantly, even the segments that we think the click-based attribution model is most appropriate, rarely go above 4%. So I think this is more, one, it's saying, are we going to crush out a market segment? And two, more importantly, it's saying maybe your attribution model is fundamentally flawed, and so some are going to show up as 20, 30%. And that's really going to concern me that you're missing something.
Can I ask a question about the previous slide, actually?
Yeah.
Have you done a calculation where you see what happens if a small player, or a big player really, takes the ad spend from the third-party bucket and puts that into search ads, and then how does that?
Yeah, so I haven't done that calculation. People have done. So there have been legislation surrounding like some stuff in some places, like now you can't put a liquor ad on display. And how much does the money flow over? And there definitely is a spillover. So one of the things that would happen here is that search is probably going to benefit in general because they don't use this tracking information, and the money would flow. But we haven't done that because we can't look at the budgets. We can't, and we don't have these like nice natural experiments in display quite yet. But you could, if anything happened, you could certainly start looking at that. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I mentioned the robustness check, so I'm going to jump over it. But we can look at the paper. We try to do this in enough ways to be sure, because we're going to stand up and talk about this. We really didn't want to be fundamentally miss something. Results from the content provider side. I think for content providers, this is where we might have thought this would matter more, because this notion of the ad-supported internet is kind of in the air. It's been in the air since I started using the internet, and I think it's certainly in the context of search. We obviously all have access to really big pieces of search technology that are undeniably ad-supported. We're going to define you as ad-supported for the purpose of this talk. We're going to measure if you show display ads via the AdBlock Plus list. I'll tell you the distribution is totally bimodal. Basically, you either show ads everywhere, you never show ads, and this is not surprising. We're going to just say you're ad-supported if you show ads on greater than 10% of your pages, but again, that's sort of irrelevant threshold. But note, the majority of your revenue may come from other sources. So just because you show ads, maybe you get the majority of revenue from subscriptions, for instance, or a freemium policy. Just some kind of broad scale look at the market again. There's a lot more content provider domains than there are retailers. And everything I show you here is excluding retail traffic. So this is for people that are trying to be on that side of the market providing content. So 12% of domains in our sample, we have about 10 million domains. So there's a lot more domains on the web, so we certainly missed some. Actually, we missed the majority. 12% of domains show third-party capable ads. These domains account for 32% of non-retail traffic. So after you get outside the top 100K domains, ads are very rare, right? They get very rare. And this line actually goes down as close to zero. Makes sense. You're very small. You need a lot of traffic to generate money. It's not even worth installing the ad infrastructure. In the head, it's about 20 to 30%. And the group mean is about 32%. Okay? So how does this vary across the content categories? And we're going to see that it's really concentrated in a few areas. So the red areas are traditional web publishing, news, sports, entertainment, this sort of stuff. Almost every site that shows this stuff runs display ads, and they almost exclusively. So it's almost impossible to find a news site that doesn't run display ads. They use it, but we don't think it's as big a deal, are email, games, or email and dating are both good examples. Email uses ads. Most aren't third-party targeted, but importantly, they have very low cost per page. Okay, so it's all algorithmic. Whereas web publishing, it's a big human step in there. So that's why their margins are a lot smaller. There's only 3 major webmail providers, and my strong guess is those are profitable enterprises. And dating sites, why is it 50%? 50% because either the site shows a lot of ads, or they have like a $5, $10 a month subscription, and that's why you see 50%. So some of these in here, there's a mix of subscription and ad-supported models. In the red, there's a mix of subscription and ad-supported models, but they always still at least show ads. And then services like search and social and things like that, job search websites, travel search websites, they generally don't show these sorts of ads. They rely on either paid search models like Yelp, like a paid search model, or they're just not showing ads at all, because a lot of this stuff is just, for instance, in the reference category, knowledge is just Princeton University, just doesn't show ads. Thanks guys. Okay. we do a little, last empirical exercise we do is that of these content providers, these publishing guys look particularly vulnerable. And the question you'd have is, right now, the second most popular way to generate money from a publishing, at least in terms of usage, maybe in terms of money it's the most popular way, is to do a subscription model. So like ESPN, you can use ESPN. They have a little free content, and then most of it you pay $2 a month for a subscription, okay, for it to be an insider. Okay? To get a subscription, we think a necessary conditions is that you have loyal visitation. So what we're going to measure here is what fraction of your users visit you 10 times a month or more. So in a given month, what fraction are like the loyal types that come a lot versus the types that don't come very much at all. In the head, most head sites, most of their visitors are loyal. This is not on page view basis. This is on visitor basis. So almost all their page views are loyal. So most of their visitors are loyal types. In the middle distribution, about 10 to 20% are loyal types of visitors. But in the tail distribution, these guys get almost no loyal visitors. So sad to say, probably people aren't visiting Princeton website like that. You know, maybe the students are, but the average visitor is someone that's like a college student interested, looks 2 or 3 times. Or Matt's website, it's my homepage, but he's probably not getting that much loyal visitation 10 times a month kind of situation. So outside the top 100K, it's effectively zero. And remember, we had 10 million sites here. So the vast majority of sites get no loyal visitation. Those sites didn't use ads, luckily, but these sites here do. So what we're going to do is do a little calibration exercise. And one thing I called out there is that this is the percent of your visitors. So the percent of Facebook's page views that are loyal visitors is like 99.9%. Okay, it's the percent that are visitors. Okay, but for something like New York Times, it's less. So we're going to try to calculate how much I have to charge in a subscription to recover the ad revenue I lost, if I lose all of it, if I'm forced to exogenously switch. So we talk about in the paper that this is merely a way to interpret the data. I'm going to assume that you can get $5 per 1,000 ads, which is almost certainly 2 to 3 times higher than you actually could. And I'm going to assume that only 25% of your loyal visits will pay a subscription. Clearly, there's going to be some actual price elasticity demand, so it will depend on the price. But just to calibrate, we'll assume that 25% will pay. This is consistent. This is lower than evidence for premium sites that have introduced paywalls, but presumably New York Times isn't a good example for every site. Here's a calibration exercise. So what would that subscription price be? Subscription price would be, by and large, between $2 and $3 for most content providers. This is saying what's driving these numbers? Basically, you need so many visits from display advertising to generate money that a small subscription fee in general can replace this. My guess is these numbers are realistically more about 50 cents because most sites that use subscriptions still run ads. And if, let's say, you're getting half the money from the ads, then you can sort of divide these numbers in two, like half your ad revenue dropped. And $5 CPM for people that study this is a sort of glorious monetization rate. So but notice, you could not do this outside the top 10,000. So subscriptions and freemium model are, unless you have like those 2 loyal viewers who are willing to pop up the whole site with a check, you are not going to be able to run outside the top 10,000. You just do not get the loyal visitation. So freemium subscription models are purely going to apply to torso level sites. You get enough loyal visitation to do it, and you can do the infrastructure and so forth. Maybe these sites could survive with like a micro payment system where like PayPal installs in the browser a 0.5 cent payment. 0.5 cents would be $5 CPM, 0.5 cents per visit, but they wouldn't be able to do a subscription. That's an important call out. The last empirical evidence is that, well, what's going to matter for the user is how many sites they'd have to sign up for. And this is all somewhat speculative, but this is in our sample, going from the bottom to the top. For all domains in a given month, the average user visits 250 domains. So this is actually consistent with most evidence of web browsing that people are pretty prolific in terms of visiting a lot of domains, at least a little bit. As we move over to every unit here is a sort of log base 3, so every kind of big block here is factor 3. So you can divide it by 3 for how many domains I visit that are ad supported, but notice here the median user is still visiting order 100 ad supported sites a month. But if we move that over to the ad supported sites, of all the sites, how many of those sites am I a loyal visitor of? A median user is a loyal visitor of about 8 to 10, and of those, about 2 to 3 are these ad supported guys. So what this is saying is that in a world, just what we can say about subscriptions is that in a world where subscriptions were out there, most users only are sort of loyal visitors of a few sites that are ad supported, even though their general web browsing behavior is sort of amazingly diverse, and they visit a lot of sites. So it might be viable, but it certainly might not be. But it's something that these are the necessary conditions that you would sort of need to see in the market if it was possible, and we sort of see signs of that, but it's very hard to see if it would be. All right, so let me close down. So the takeaways on third-party information is that it's currently not the engine of e-commerce. We see that the other channels are really driving most shopping, but it's very important for publishing and less so for the other categories. And what I'll say is, and I'll close down, is that based on our calculations, our best guess is in the short run, turn it on, no idea the long run. You'd see low single-digit billions of dollars in damage to the US internet economy. But I don't know how to compare that number, but I'll say is that per person privacy valuations would need to be on the order of $20 to $40 per adult to compare to these numbers in the short run. So last thing I'll say is, what do we make of this privacy valuation? I don't know. So is $20 to $40 per person per year, is that generally a big number, or is that a small number? So that would be a big number to save like the spotted fox, but I don't know if it's a big number. The evidence surrounding this number is very limited. It's a very hard number to estimate. So the output of our study for the short run is it's producing a number that it's putting it maybe in this ambiguous range. It's hard to know. But of course, this you might want to, in terms of the path of innovation and all of the surrounding questions, it's much more complex question. But I'll close by saying the output of what we've done is, I think these are the kind of target numbers that we expect to see out of the other side of the whole literature that is working on this question, and that's our first guess at a number that the ballpark of numbers we should be looking for. Yep.
$20 to $40 per person is per person who shops online.
Per U.S. adult that web browses, so about per 150 million people. So I'd say 100 million people. So I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know but that's the number. Yeah. So.
So you're saying that's damage to the U.S. economy aimed largely at the publishing sector?
Yeah, well, we think it will be largely an almost utility space of users that use a site that will go down. It's our best guess. But it will not be in the e-commerce sector, and it won't be a long-run competitive impact in the e-commerce sector, which definitely could have been true. It will be in the publishing. It will be people who run ad exchanges. But of course, DoubleClick, the biggest ad exchange, if they could still do their cookie synchronization, it'd probably be in the hundreds of millions, because they can still link up all the information, and now they monopolize it. It might not even be bad for them in the long run. So it's a contextual issue of how the policy is written. This number is the most aggressive one, that DoubleClick can't synchronize cookies, which means advertising on a display exchange, and I can't identify users. But my guess is that's not the way that policy would get written and get implemented if it really happened, just based on political,
Sorry, it's a law professor question. Damage exactly from what?
Damage from the inability to identify user preferences and target them with advertisements. Then that's going to decline.
So a sort of omnibus privacy legislation.
Yeah, an aggressive privacy legislation I would view it as, how much are ad revenues being lowered, and how does that affect the publisher's viability in the marketplace, and how does that affect the returns to people that run ad exchanges? So in this case, it's primarily Google, but there's lots of players in this space. Disclaimer, Microsoft does run an ad exchange also.
And so you're looking only at the supplier side of the economy when you're calculating damage.
So
it's not a social calculus, it's an individual.
I don't know the distinction.
Well, I mean, depending on how you frame your definition.
It's meant
of
to capture all market participants.
But not the
users,
consumers.
But the utility side of it's very difficult. So it's a huge guess. So like, what we see here is that the average user doesn't frequently visit a site that we think would be at risk more than one or two. And the big question here is, what's the substitutable options for that site? Okay? So these are way sort of out of scope and very difficult. What this is here is the numbers you could mention. So insofar as like, there's users that visit a site that get shut down, and there's a utility loss of $200, we're effectively zeroing that out. We're doing sort of the channels we can measure. So it's certainly this number is at best a guess of 4 people that worked on the topic with a ton of data for a while, but it could be substantially lower, I could say, because basically the privacy policy could really do very limited damage to advertising.
I think the definition of the word damage varies importantly across disciplines.
Yes.
So it's just something that you'll want to.
Yeah. So I would let me rephrase. impact on revenue, recorded revenue, and a mild guess at utility. Yeah.
So it seems to me that your result is maybe more general than your title would have indicated, because this is not just about do not track, I think. It's about any outcome in which third-party behavioral advertising either becomes impossible or more difficult. Right, so that includes if the rest of the market adopted, let's say, Apple's Safari-style third-party cookie controls.
Yeah.
Or if a lot of people suddenly started using ad block.
If a lot of people suddenly, yeah, absolutely.
Right, so any of those scenarios, this is like, seems like you're putting kind of an upper bound on how much revenue could get moved around or reduced. If,
the move around question is huge. Yeah.
If third-party behavioral advertising became just impossible.
And just to comment on that, the move around question is enormous. So Facebook recently started allowing third-party cookies on their site. It's not obvious that that's a good decision for them, because the move around to them, if you can't track people, who has the most information? Them. Now they monopolize that part of the value chain. You can only capture the revenued information insofar as you monopolize information on a user. And so the move around could be huge. So it could, and in general, the move around would be in the direction of the big players that that contributes to the policy that gets written, and then have the web serving assets that do touch enough users to generate those profiles. Yeah. So I agree. It is certainly broader than that. If people start using AdBlock Plus, what you're seeing here is the outcry probably wouldn't come from the e-commerce side. It would come from publishing, like news publisher side. That's what this would say.
At least those are the people who should be complaining.
Yeah, that's the people who should be complaining. Everyone, well, yeah, who knows who would complain? But that's what the data would say that would hit their bottom line, the top line. Sorry, the quickest. Yeah, sorry.
Well, if a lot of this legislation has died in committee, does that mean that someone's making phone calls? I mean, is there a powerful?
You can look these up, and I think we cite in the paper. There have been letters opposing the legislation signed by many big companies, and not companies that the names you'd recognize, and some of the names I've been mentioning. So that they haven't written those letters for every one of them. But that's the hardest evidence I could point to. In terms of the lobbying and so forth, I would say that an educated guess would be the advertising lobby stronger than the pro-privacy lobby. But it's also the case that neither side had a lot of evidence, quantitative evidence on this. So even these numbers weren't available for either side. So I think the question is probably a little more nuanced and complex than I gave it credit for. But beyond that, a privacy side couldn't come with data to bolster the case, so it's sort of hard to justify it. It clearly is an important policy in it, and so I think there's a lack of data and maybe an asymmetric power distribution in Washington. Surveys do show people support it, but surveys also show people don't know what it is. So I don't know how to make that. Most people don't like third-party tracking. Most people don't know what it is. So it means they don't like most things they don't like. No.
To the extent that the advertisers are going to lose, and the fact that that number is very small with respect to U.S. GDP, for example, it's going to die in committee. It's not a big number, and it's just one industry.
Yeah. So I don't know how big this number is, but it's easy to die in committee because it's never. If most people's privacy evaluations are in this range, then it's not something consumers care enough about to cry about. And it's certainly disproportionately, this is $30 might be spread across the whole US population, but its pain will be felt by 2 or 3 US corporations. So there's a distributional thing going on here too, and that might impact the political economy. But again, totally not obvious that I would have thought as an independent person that certain companies would be proposing privacy legislation to enhance their advertising revenue based on who can control data. Apple's play in this would go into that. AdBlock Plus has a really weird business model that's I will say is like pretty shady, on the record. And so they're not someone that people want to get in bed with long term, I don't think. But we thank them for those lists.
They worked really hard on this list.
Yeah.
In the vein of AdBlock Plus, I think what you're getting at is, didn't they take money recently to not block certain ads?
Yeah.
So are those not on the list that you use?
They are. They're on a different list.
Oh, so okay. So
they're on a list of the good one, the white list.
So you just took both.
For instance, search ads are on that list. Yeah. So we took the union of those two lists. Yeah. They're somewhat open about their business practice of taking money in exchange for whitelisting. So they do put these stuff out there, but we do use that. Yeah. But that's one of the reasons. And the install base of like AdBlock Plus right now, they say is 20 million US users, but they're not a company that it's not sort of any web browser could default AdBlock Plus into their web browser, and hasn't done that probably because it's not beneficial in the short run to any company that runs a web browser. Mozilla and the Internet Explorer and Chrome, there's not beneficial in the short run. So, but if that changed, then that could fundamentally shift the issue here, which is why there was a big hullabaloo about IE's do not track flag. But AdBlock Plus would be the one that would really change the game because it's fightable, but it would be a mess. And I could talk more about the technical aspects of how companies would fight AdBlock Plus if they got particularly aggrieved offline. If anyone's interested. Anyway, sorry I ran over, Matt. I don't know.
Why don't we adjourn to informal discussion?
Okay, thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.